That brings us to motivation. So motivation is a variable that strengthens or weakens the value of a reinforcer. So we've talked about our SRS psychology, we've had our antecedent, our behavior, our consequences. And we've looked at that on how do we analyze behavior? How do we analyze a single wave? And so now we're going to incorporate motivation into how we analyze what is occurring. So motivating operations, they have value altering effects and behavior altering effects, and we'll talk about each of those. Value altering effects include that the motivating operation increases the potency of the reinforcer. So the value of reinforcer depends on response requirements and other environmental variables like time of deprivation. So if you haven't had your favorite drink in 6 weeks, that is going to increase the potency of that reinforcer or that drink. And then within that, we also have reinforcer establishing and reinforcer abolishing effects. So it can either increase the value of that potency of the reinforcer or decrease it. So an MO's value altering effect is observed when the manipulation of certain environmental variables affects the speed with which an organism acquires new behaviors that produce that relevant consequence. So then we have behavior altering effects. So this is a change in frequency due to the organism's behavior contacting reinforcement. So we have our value altering, that potency of the reinforcer, it's going to increase. Then we also have the behavior altering, so that organism's behavior is going to alter. And this occurs after the reinforcer has been obtained. And we can either have reinforcer establishing or reinforcer abolishing effects. So let's do a quick review. Which of the following describes the concept where a stimulus is added after a behavior occurs and that behavior increases in the future? So think about that table we walked, or you can go back if you need, and think about which of the following describes the concept where a stimulus is added after a behavior occurs and that behavior increases in the future. Is it A, positive punishment, B, negative punishment, C, positive reinforcement, D, negative reinforcement? So take some time, pause the video if you need more time. Again, you can go back to that table to help you with this question. So the correct answer is positive reinforcement. So we're adding a stimulus and that behavior increases. So we know the behavior increases, it has to be in reinforcement. It can't be positive punishment or negative punishment because punishment is where the future occurrence of the behavior decreases. So automatically we read behavior increases, we know that is positive reinforcement and it increases in the future, right? So then we have to decide, okay, is it positive reinforcement or is it negative reinforcement? So then we read that a stimulus is added and we know it is positive because if the stimulus was terminated, postponed, removed, that would be negative. If we're presenting a stimulus, if we're adding it, it's going to be positive. So we know this one is going to be positive reinforcement. So we've talked about our 3-term contingency. We've kind of talked about this a lot. We've got our antecedent, stimulus change, behavior, and then a consequence, which is a stimulus change. For example, our antecedent could be the doorbell rings, the behavior, we answer the door, consequence, neighbor gives us cookies, right? Now that we've talked about motivation, we're going to add that into our 4-term contingency. So now we have motivation, antecedent, behavior, consequence. So for this example, we're up all night with our kids, right? And that's going to increase the potency of the reinforcer, in this case, coffee, because we're just exhausted, we're tired, we've got to go to work, we need an energy boost. So the antecedent is we drive past the coffee shop, we engage in the behavior of buying coffee, and then we get an energy boost. Now we'll take 2 minutes to do another activity. You'll have 2 minutes to write down everything you've ever learned in your life. Count how many things you could write down. So take 2 minutes. It's not we won't be able to get everything, but write as many things as you can of different things that you've learned in your life in 2 minutes, and then come back. So human behavior, as I'm sure you've learned with that activity, is so complex. I mean, you could write so many things in just 2 minutes, and you could never write everything you know. And these behaviors can be communication skills, life skills, social skills, motor skills. The list could go on and on and on forever. Human behavior is just so complex, both respondent behaviors and operant behaviors. We do so much. And we're constantly learning, we're constantly interacting with our environment. So really the list could go on and on forever. You've learned a lot in life and will continue to learn each day. Have you learned everything in life by experiencing it directly though? So think about that. How have you learned all the things you've learned, and have you learned them by experiencing it directly? Have you been taught every single thing you know directly? Have you been sat down and taught every little single thing you know? Even just think about the language you know. Has every word you know been taught directly? Just think about that for a second. So we can learn quickly through rule-governed behavior. So if you think about it, not everything that we have learned is learned directly. There's a lot of things that we learn through rule-governed behavior. So things like maybe our mom tells us, or dad, or our caregiver tells us, don't touch the hot stove. And so maybe you learned that through rule-governed behavior, so someone told you not to touch the hot stove, and you never did it. Or maybe you learned it through contingency-shaped behavior. So again, contingency-shaped behavior, it's going to be shaped by those consequences. So maybe you learned this by you actually did touch the stove, and it was hot, and then now you didn't ever touch it again. So we can learn both through rule-governed behavior and contingency-shaped behavior. So rule-governed behavior is learning by verbal statements. Don't touch the hot stove. Don't speed. Stop at the stop sign. Things like that. Contingency-shaped behavior is learning through direct experiences with contingencies. Again, the consequences, the stimulus changes that occur after that behavior that shape that future occurrence of the behavior. So we each have unique learning histories. Each individual has a unique history of learning experiences that results in a unique repertoire of learned behaviors. Learning repertoires look different for every single individual and can impact their lives in different contexts. Consider the following examples. You've studied electrical engineering your whole entire life. Your parents were both electrical engineers. You worked in high school with them, and you got your degree in electrical engineering. One day, you walked into your friend's house and their light switches aren't working. What would you do? So think about it. In this example, you're likely ready. You've got the knowledge, you've got the repertoire, you know exactly how to fix those things, you know exactly how to troubleshoot what's going on because you have such a robust learning history in electrical engineering, and you likely have a pretty big learning repertoire in electrical engineering. So another example, you met a new friend and they invite you to play Dungeons and Dragons at their house. You've never heard of this game. You also come from a family that never played games together. Maybe you're a family that did a lot of different outings, and so you never really played games. You don't know what dragons are, and you definitely don't know what dungeons are. And so you walk in, and there's a group of 6 people all dressed up and ready to play. What would you do? How are you feeling? What would you even go? Things like that. Think of like how this learning history of you have no idea what Dungeons and Dragons is. How is that going to affect your behavior? How is that going to affect how you're feeling? And you're likely, maybe you don't even go, maybe you start to ask a lot of questions, maybe you get really quiet because you don't want to say something that's wrong. There's so many ways that this learning history is going to affect your behavior. Another example, a 7-year-old autistic little girl is going to school for the very first time. She's never been in a classroom before. She has never been in a group of 30 kids before. She's never had to sit in a chair for longer than a minute. She is still learning how to read and likely can't read the schedule on the board. The class is starting independent work time. What would she do? So, looking at her learning history, we might expect her to get up, to start walking around, to maybe run out of the classroom, maybe start yelling out, maybe start, going and playing with toys in the classroom because she has no idea what to do. She's never had to do any of these things before. And so she's going to likely feel like probably how you feel in Dungeons and Dragons. Understanding learning histories fosters empathy. So we talked about how our learning histories and our repertoires are so individualized, and we are all learning every day with unique repertoires that impact our daily context. So how will understanding learning histories change your view of others? And it's something I think we can think a lot about in the school setting when we're engaging with so many different students, with so many different learning histories, in so many different contexts that we will never be able to understand perfectly. And so using this and thinking about their learning histories, thinking about their unique repertoires can help foster empathy for them. So the final project will have instructions for you, and you can complete that to complete this workshop. Thank you so much from all of us at Project Access. Thank you for your hard work. We know your work often goes unnoticed, but we are incredibly thankful for amazing professionals like you who change students' lives daily. For more information, you can scan this QR code to gain more information about Project Access. Here are the resources we used for this workshop. Thank you.